All right, hello everybody. My name is Nathan Eason. I work with the University of Georgia College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences in an extension. I'm an county agent in the northeast part of the state, and I got involved in the ASEV Eastern section a while back and have just really soaked it up and gotten plugged in. That I serve as a board member. We have some other board members on our panelist discussion today, but we just want to invite you to our first formal session of Hang Time, Grapevines to Wine, kind of a lunch and learn. This is just an attempt of our organization to promote who we are, tell our stories. We're all in this together. Every university institution that is doing great work across our country, but this kind of gives us that opportunity to stay connected and just have these discussions. And hopefully you'll find that today's discussion on frost and spring frost and how to learn from it and how to manage with, work with it. We're going to learn all about it, but we hope that's relevant to everybody on the East Coast. And East Coast and ASEV has a pretty wide range. So we're thankful for that. I'm going to turn it over to our chair of our organization, Dr. Mark Hoffman. And so he's going to just say a few words before we get started.
Thanks, Nathan. So hello, everyone. My name is Mark, and I am the current chair of the ASEV Eastern section. And I just wanted to say that the ASEV has been funded in the 1950s. And the ASEV Eastern section is one of only two separate sections of the ASEV organization, funded in 1975, established in 1975. And the other section is in Japan. And the Eastern section covers an area, everything east of the Rocky Mountains. So from Texas and New Mexico, and we have like some person from Texas here, hi Justin, all the way to Canada. And we are traditionally a group of researchers that then collaborate and try to work on different extension and research projects across the nation with a focus on Eastern viticulture and enology. And we would really like to open this association more up to industry partners and growers. So there are several ways how you can be engaged in this association. We, for example, give stipends out to several students every year that work in the viticulture and enology realm in Eastern Americas, in Canada and the Eastern United States. And that is a good way for industry to be engaged in our association. And other ways, you can be member of this association and join us in Austin this year, in Austin, Texas, for the conference that is at the beginning of June in Austin. We have usually a 2 to 3 day conference that is organized every year by us, where we talk about current research and new interests in research. This year, we're going to talk a lot about environmental issues in viticulture. And that is from June 7th to 9th in 2023. And you will find a lot more information at the ASEV Eastern section homepage that Renee has put into the chat box. And I thank everybody for being here. I hope we have a really lively discussion. And I am looking very forward to this topic because it's getting really warm here now. And we're a little bit afraid that we have pretty early bud break here in our area. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to one of our main presenters, Michela Centinari from Penn State, where she serves as a viticulture specialist and is kind of well known for her knowledge in cold stress on vines. And we thought, hey, let's get Michela in here to talk about this topic. I'm down in Georgia. She's up in Pennsylvania. Justin's in Texas. Renee's in Arkansas. Everybody deals with frost. And so I'm going to let Michela kind of take the reins here, but basically we're going to kind of cover, we have damage. Now what? There is some preventative stuff. I think a lot of us know how to prevent, but we're going to talk about that and cover this. We're going to cover the bases, but here's what I want you to do. If you have questions, please raise your hand and just feel free to interrupt so we can discuss what you want to know. So with that, Michela, I'll pass it over to you.
So hi everyone. So I also I'm glad there is Justin here and Maria, both Maria from Ohio State and Justin from Texas, so we can all kind of together cover this issue. Like Nathan said, is an issue that affects all of us, every state, and also Mark from North Carolina and Renee in Arkansas. So we don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation because we want this to be an open discussion and answer questions from the attendees. We have Maria and I put together a few slides, just photo and pictures to cover some main points that maybe may be familiar to you or not. But I really, want this to be no lecture, right? An open discussion. And maybe Nathan already introduced me, but I don't know if Maria and Justin also they want and introduce themselves, because they're also extension specialists and they deal with growers and frost issues.
Sure, ladies first, Maria.
Sorry, Justin, I saw you unmute yourself. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Smith. I actually joined ASEV as a student back in 2014 when Michela was my advisor at Penn State. In 2018, I moved next door to Ohio State in a 100% viticulture extension position. So yes, I talk to growers all the time. I too am very familiar with frost and cold injury in general because we cope with that both in winter injury and in spring injury, especially in Ohio. It's 70 degrees today here in Northeast Ohio, which is a crying shame because our average temperatures right now are like 38 degrees. So this is a very timely and pertinent issue, and yeah, look forward to our discussion today.
Hey, I'm Justin Shiner. I'm in Texas and College Station, and I work primarily in extension as a viticulturist, and I've been part of ASEV maybe for over a decade now, so for a very long time, before we had webinars like this. And spring frost is no doubt a challenge for us, and it always has been. And interestingly enough, in the very southern tip of Texas, we are at bud break right now. So we will harvest those grapes as early as late June, and then elsewhere in the state, it's a bit later. But this year it has been warm, so there is a good chance that we're going to have earlier bud break than usual. So we were always interested in ways that we can mitigate the risk or the damage from late spring freeze. So I'm glad to be here.
Yep, and here too in Central PA today, Central PA is 71 Fahrenheit, which is really, really, amazing for the students, but not for us and for the growers. I mean, it's scary, right? Because as we know, warmer temperature right now may promote an early bud break, and we have, at least for us, the late frost. I mean, the last spring frost usually can be any time in May, even sometimes we had May 20, but definitely until the first week of May, there is always a risk of frost. So we really hope we don't have an early bud break. And for us, early is like April, right? I mean, beginning of mid-April. Okay, so I don't know about the attendees. I mean, if you also, can maybe type in the chat where you're from and if you have frost injury, we can start covering some of the bases unless someone from the...
And that's a good point. So if anybody that's listening in wants to type in where they're from, that way it kind of gives us some a little bit of information about who our audience is here today. That'd be helpful.
I see Michigan, Kentucky, Georgia. Wow, everywhere.
A little bit everywhere. Iowa, North Carolina, Ohio, New Jersey. Great.
Georgia. Okay, good. And how many of you experience, I guess, spring frost damage? If you are a grower or, someone working with grapes, I guess.
Harleen says that there's a blizzard today in North Dakota.
Yep.
So.
Wow, how about that? Yeah, where some of us are thinking that global warming is a thing, there are other people on here I could probably argue that fact of how much cold weather they've gotten this year.
And that's why we call it climate change.
Indiana.
Great. No frost, but cold damage. Yeah, that is something else we were talking also with Maria.
Yeah, I mean, it's 70 degrees today, but back in Christmas, actually, that's why I'm working from home. We got down to -7, -8 in Worcester, Northeast Ohio, back December 24th or so. So our building heating coil failed, the pipes froze, the entire building flooded. But yeah, and then southwestern Ohio actually hit like -13. So we do have significant winter injury. I think I talked to Ahmed Dami, our viticulture research faculty here at OSU yesterday. We have almost 85% primary bud injury in Chamberson. So, and Chamberson's one of our more cold, hardier hybrids. So that tells you something. Yeah, we struggle a lot with fluctuating temperatures.
So when me and Michela were talking about planning for this session, you know, we knew that we're talking about temperatures, right? So we knew that this deep winter freeze conversation was going to come up because we want to talk about, you know, what is frost? Well, frost, I really want to focus on spring frost, but I think just for a second, if either Maria or Michela, you want to talk about that polar plunge that we had and you know, how are you assessing that damage? I know on the east side over here, I say Georgia, North Carolina, Mark, and we've all been discussing it. And I think kind of the jury's still out. And a lot of times it's just a wait and see game for us, but there may be some more scientific approaches to determining that ahead of time.
Yeah, we always recommend growers assess their primary bud mortality before they even start pruning. And that's why we also encourage most growers to push off pruning as late as possible for their vineyard size, just because we know that with these temperature flux, we can have injury well into March from winter damage. So yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good primer to the spring type injury that we're going to talk about anyway. Is, you know, that's a way that you can stave off bud break to begin with, but also allows you to adjust your pruning strategy. So I know the common adage is, you know, somewhere between 3 to 6 shoots per foot of space by leaving buds, but we almost always leave more buds than we can actually keep because we know a lot of those are going to be dead. And then we use shoot thinning to cut down to our final fruitful shoots for the season.
And just in case that our audience is unfamiliar with how to do like bud dissection and how to make that assessment now, is there a great resource or link or a video where somebody's demonstrating how to do that we can either post in the chat or y'all can mention it here on air?
Yeah, I mean, I can find the YouTube channel. There was at least what we use, so the students use, there was some videos. Those are nice. A couple of them from Cornell. You know, the videos are nice because they really show you how to, you know, dissect the buds and show you the damage. And I have here a picture, if I can share my screen showing. Let's try. Let's try.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So these, yeah. Okay, so this is not from this winter. Okay, it was from a previous winter. It was a cold sensitive variety, and we, as Maria said, we were worried about, you know, winter damage or cold damage during the dormant season, not after bud break. So we're talking about winter damage, and we collect canes from this vineyard block. One thing you have to do, you have to keep them indoor room temperature for at least 24 hours before doing the dissecting. And you can check, you know, those videos from extension, you know, university. They show you how to slice carefully the buds and look for damage on so this one in the middle is the primary buds. Okay, and so because the compound, I mean, probably you already know, but the compound buds of the grapevine has 3 buds inside. So primary, secondary, and tertiary. So in this one specifically, we can see that the primary is black, right? So is dead, while the other 2 are alive, or they look like they are alive. So in this specific case, we can say the primary bud is dead, and but the other 2 are alive. But we know also that the secondary and tertiary buds are not definitely as fruitful as the primary, depending on variety. So yeah, we typically recommend also growers, if they suspect winter damage, to wait. Like Maria said, wait, don't prune the vines, do an assessment first, and then adjust pruning weight. I know that can be hard, for growers, and maybe that have, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 acres, because they need to start, right? Especially if they have only a few people pruning. They cannot wait until March, right, to start pruning. So it can be a little hard, but you can start pruning with the most cold hardy varieties, and then move to the most cold sensitive. And
Or the ones that, or the ones
no,
that break bud later, you can start with earlier as well. And the ones that break bud earlier, push off to later. One thing I want to add to that is for larger vineyards, if you have to like get pruning right now, then, and you want to stave off a lot of these issues, one thing that you can do is pre-prune. So you can go through and hedge all your vines now, pull out the brush, and then clean up and do your final pruning once the major threats of winter injury have passed. So that's another tactic you can use too. And I think we have some slides on that when it comes to, it's actually technically called double pruning. So we have some slides on that we can show you as well, but that would be the strategy that I would try to use.
Maria, in Georgia, we did some pruning trials, and they're thinking about saving time during that spring when everything's got to be moving so fast. And we were doing the double pruning, leaving 7 to 10 buds. However, we were also going ahead and selecting and taking out the canes that we wanted to keep. And so I don't know if that's a common practice across where, you can take your time, during the winter pruning on your first pruning. Well, some people call the first, you're hedging, you're kind of taking it down to that 7-10 bud. But you can go back and do what I kind of a second pruning and take out all the unwanted and go ahead and get your shoot density set. That way your labor can be really not as specifically trained to make those hard decision cuts right there at the springtime. Does anybody else practice that same?
I think I follow what you're saying, and we double prune primarily the rough or trash pruning, the long pruning, whatever you want to call it. It's just it's efficient, especially if you can do it, mechanically. But just to pull the brush, that takes the most time, and then come back and final prune. But I mean, the benefit of late spring freeze and possible delay in bud break is awesome. But most important for us is fungal trunk disease, which is why we recommend double pruning, which I know is not necessarily what we're talking about today, but I think it's important to mention here. So an added benefit, a huge benefit of double pruning.
Yeah, and I think that's a good perspective, Justin, because we typically are replacing our wood a lot more frequently than you guys are. So it tends to be less of a problem for us. And if we're getting trunk disease, a lot of times it's from trunk cracking and splitting during the winter. So that's why it's almost impossible to go to a single vineyard here and not have crown gall or not have some sort of trunk disease, even if it's not your prototypical Esca or Botrisphaeria or whatever. Or it could be all the above, who knows?
That sap flow is, and somebody mentioned it in the text, this warming up and kind of have your sap flow kind of starts a bit early. And then when you get those cold hard freezes later and later in the season, that's where you can see those splittings and things. I know we've had those incidences here as well. And I get the end of a lot of days, there's not a lot you can do. But let's keep on track. When we think about spring frost, and all this has been great relevant discussion on these cold snaps and how we're going to kind of manage that. But obviously Michela, there's some preventative things that we can do. So let's talk about that. You got you muted. Hang on, let me unmute you.
Sorry, I muted myself and I forgot. So yes, we can, since we were talking about pruning, I don't know if you we want to follow up and talking about how double pruning can be used to avoid or reduce the chance of spring frost injury, or we can cover more traditional ways. We have some pictures on the double pruning if you think. Let me reshare. And it's hard for me to see the chat, so if okay, here, sorry, I have to Okay. So, okay, this is a very nice slide that Maria put together showing that the temperature, the critical temperature to kill a tissue definitely, is higher, or the tissue is more sensitive to cold temperature as they reach bud break or a past bud break, right? We know dormant buds can survive temperature well below freezing. When we approach bud break, or we have this green tissue here, definitely temperature just below freezing can kill the tissue. So that was just a reminder about the sensitivity to low temperature increase close to bud break and after. And this kind of, lead to why, we use double pruning or delay winter pruning. People use different terminology. Just a reminder that this technique is mainly used for cordon trained vines. So cordon trained and the vines that are spur pruned, not typically cane pruned vines. At least the major use is for spur pruned vines. And basically take advantage of what we call the apical pattern of bud break, or apical dominance. And you can see hopefully in the picture in the middle, like when you leave canes upright, maybe this cane have like 8 buds, 8, 10 buds, 6, 8 buds, you can see the one on the top start to push an opening, and that will suppress the growth, the bud break of the buds at the bottom. So basically, like Nathan and Justin and Maria were saying, double pruning consists of 2 passes. You do a first pass of pruning anytime in the winter, down to maybe 10 buds, 8 buds, and then later on in the spring, after the one on the top are starting to, push and open, you go back and do the second pass, which is one here in the right. So hopefully
Michela,
this.
we have a
Yes.
question.
Yes.
How long do you wait between frost or cold damage and bud assessment? So what's the amount of time before you assess the buds after a damage event? A week? How long?
Very good question. We typically wait definitely a few days at least, and then when you collect the canes, you need to leave them at room temperature for at least 24 hours. We don't typically do the assessment the next day, right? We want to be sure that the tissue is completely necrotic and died. But I don't know if there is any, threshold, official threshold, a recommendation on when to do the dissecting. I don't know if Maria or Justin have other thoughts.
Yeah, definitely a few days. I mean, could be up to a week. It depends on how long that cold snap actually lasts, but you do want the buds to have a chance to thaw out in a somewhat normal way. You don't want to go from like minus 10 degrees up to, 60 degrees or something like that rapidly. You want to give it a few days. Maybe that ambient temperature will flux back up into the 20s or 30s, and then you bring them in overnight or something like that. So yeah, at least a few days, if not a week or so. But if they're dead, they're dead. So, you could wait even longer than that if you really wanted to.
Yeah, or if you want to wait for another, in case there is another event later on. But yeah, at least a few days or a week, unless you're in a hurry, because you need to prune.
Yeah, I mean, we usually check more out of curiosity than because we're going to start pruning. And so we'll typically check multiple times throughout the winter, maybe once after a cold event like we had in December, but then maybe again once we really get into our final pruning into late March, and then we'll check again just to see if there was any exacerbated injury.
So is there a certain threshold of numbers per bud, numbers of bud per acre or something that you want to look at if you do the assessment, or do you like eyeball it when you go into the vineyard?
No, we take a percentage out of 100. So, right, if you take 10 canes and they have 10 buds per cane and you go and dissect it, that gives you a really simple percentage. And then we have tables of formulas where you can adjust your bud retention based on the amount of injury. So that's how we typically do it.
And maybe you want to collect, if you are a vineyard like this one in the picture that, is on a kind of slope, you definitely want to collect canes from multiple areas, like a low spot, higher spot, because likely the damage is not uniform, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, typically it's not uniform. You will have a low spot probably with higher injury and assuming you have the same cultivar, right, in this block, yes.
Thanks for the question.
And I just want to show this picture here to as a reminder that for the double pruning, one, I guess, warning, at least for us in PA, maybe different warmer climates, we don't want to wait too long to do the second pass. Like when the shoots are like, you can see the shoots on the top of the canes, maybe they have 1-2 leaves unfolded, then we want to do the second cut. If we wait too long and the shoots on top are long, we may have some negative effect, like, reduce yield, increase bud mortality, like the buds at the base of the cane, they're not going to push and open. So double pruning works to delay bud break, but also you need to be careful, at least for us in our cool climate with a shorter season, not to push the delay too long, because you can have also some consequences for fruit ripening and etc. So that would be my suggestion, and definitely it's labor intensive. So it's something else, you need to consider. Of course, it's not something you will do in the whole vineyard, but only maybe in the frost-prone area. But you need to be sure to have the labor, needed to go back and do the second pass at a specific time, right? Yes.
So in this picture that you shared, is this would you say it's already like time? It's like above time, like it's already too late because of like all the flush that you already have like on the top of this?
This case was okay, but 1 year we waited too long. And Maria, when you were here, yeah, this was an experiment we did the first year with Maria, and we waited too long. It was warm, and the buds at the top, they really grow very fast, and the shoots were like that long. And we definitely see a delay in phenology and growth stage until veraison. I mean, the vines that were the delay prune vines reach veraison like later than the other vines, and we saw some difference in fruit chemistry at harvest. So, here we are in central PA, right? I don't know, maybe very different in Texas or in North Carolina, where it's warmer and you have maybe a longer growing season. But that's something to consider.
So we did something in Texas, this is about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where we were trying to understand that question of how long is too long to wait to final prune. And I had a student for a master's project. She was trying to delay bud break with some different hormone-based treatments or compounds. But one thing she did is, it was in, I think, 6 different varieties, is we pruned at bud break, final pruned, and then we left some vines for another 4 weeks before we final pruned. So they look very similar to this picture right here, but we waited 4 more weeks, and depending upon the variety, yield was reduced in comparison by anywhere from 20 to 80%.
Right.
Depending upon what variety. Now, the question we did not answer is, did the inflorescence die, or did the primary bud actually die? Was it like a carbohydrate issue? That part I'm not clear on.
So was it all vinifera, or was it all also hybrids would probably have?
It was a combo. It was a combination. So the ones that were least affected in terms of yield were the hybrids.
Because they had fruitful secondaries, probably, or something.
Yes, well, exactly. That's why I was saying I'm not 100% sure if the primary bud did not actually die, or if the inflorescence did. I would assume it was the primary bud itself, but I don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. I was going to say, I hypothesize it's some sort of phytohormone situation, some sort of like auxin cytokinin response that's driving that lower yield. But is it because the primary actually dies, or if it's, something else with the inflorescence development is probably more likely?
Yeah, but it's a very good point about the variety. The varieties may respond differently to double pruning. They're not all the same, right? So it will be good to try on a few vines first and see, because you can have maybe higher bud mortality or reduction in yield in one variety and no effect on another. Like we saw the same, we found like Riesling was more affected, negatively affected than Lemberger, for example, and same site, same vineyard, same environmental condition, but there was a variety effect, yes.
And of course, we all know that, knowing your site and site selection is one of the biggest preventative
Oh, yeah.
things that we can do. And I just want to tie that into what we're discussing, because we keep talking about varieties and their potential to break bud early, but obviously at different areas of your vineyard as well to consider. And of course, everything like in Georgia, our average vineyard size is probably, I don't know, 5 acres, with some big ones up in the 40 acres and smaller 15. But my point being is, at some point you got to pull the trigger and say, okay, we're going to start when there's 2 to 3 leaf buds at these tips of these long shoots. But by the time you finish your block or finish that variety, it's 3 or 4 or 5 days later, and all of a sudden now you got 5 and 6 inch growth, depending on the weather and what it's doing, or however long it takes you to get through it. And of course, labor is just becoming a more and more bigger issue in this industry, it seems. So.
Well, and to that point too, waiting to final prune until the buds are swollen or you have small shoots, you have to be much more careful too, because those buds get knocked off really easily, which is another benefit of rough pruning first, so that you don't have a lot of brush pulling and you're shaking the vines as much.
Yeah, definitely. We noticed that, especially for people who try to do this delay pruning on cane prune vines, right? So they leave these long canes verticals and then they tie them. They trim them, they tie them down when the buds are like, swollen or start to push, and there is damage, definitely. It's very hard to do this double pruning or delay pruning on cane prune vines. It's much easier on spur prune vines, in my limited experience, but definitely there is chance of damaging the vines more if you do on cane prune vines.
So we have a question from Vanessa saying, does snow on the ground / insulation make a difference on when you do this dormant prune? I've not had this much snow in a long time before, but the vines are exposed, of course. We have had a record lows for the last 5 days. Vineyard planted over a decade ago with replacement vines in between. Does anybody want to take that one? It's basically discussing the amount of snow influence the time of this.
I don't think so. I mean, you can start, if you're double pruning, you can start as early as January, because the vines are going to be in their lowest or most cold hardy state. So I don't think snow really influences that much.
But it's about like snow insulating the soil and affecting like the time of bud break. Is that what Vanessa is? I don't know if she, if the soil being protected by the snow will be warmer. That's something that. But yeah, otherwise, I don't think it will affect the time you do double pruning. But I don't know if soil temperature, that is a big debate, right, will affect the bud break.
Snow does affect it in Texas, because if it's snowing, we're inside the house where it's nice and warm.
Yes, right.
Waiting for better weather to prune.
So when we think about other things that are in our control, because I want to wrap up this at 12:30 to be discussing, okay, we have damage, now what? So we definitely want to make sure we get to that point in the conversation. But so we think about all the frost preventative stuff, whether you got the spudge pots, the burning, wind machines. Actually, in Georgia, we have a vineyard who has some overhead irrigation, just kind of like the citrus industry does. I'm not sure if that's anybody else has adopted that across the country. So does anybody just want to talk about how, I mean, obviously there are all tools in the toolbox, right? And we're all assessing this thing, and there's just always this fine balance between pruning and when you use the machines. Michela, I'll let you take the rein on that.
Sorry, what you want us to discuss this preventive strategies, or what to do after you get the damage?
Let's just continue with discussing some of the other tools in the toolbox, obviously, that we have. Understanding weather events and what types of freezes is something that I probably lack a lot of understanding. Was it convective, and what do you?
Advective and the radiation frost, what we call, yeah.
So let's just talk about that and then what machines are working what conditions.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You mentioned like the, for example, the wind machine, you know, the fan. Those one, for example, only or mostly work when you have what we call a radiation frost, right? When you have the clear sky, so in the night, you know, no wind, clear sky, beautiful night, but the air is colder, and when the air is colder of the soil and of the plants. So what, and this is so it's below, the air is below freezing and it's colder than the plants and then the soil. So what happens is like the vines are going to release heat and become colder and colder, you know, and become colder than the air. So this is what we call radiation frost, and this is what typically happen in our regions. Like here in Pennsylvania, we mostly see radiation frosts. Advective freeze is when you have this movement, you know, of air, mass of air. So it's more like a windy condition, but we don't have many advective freezes here. Probably I didn't use the right terminology, you know, but you know, I'm not a climatologist, whatever, but mostly it's like when it's windy and you have this air movement, that is an advective freeze. When the air is, you know, it's no wind, beautiful night, sky, clear sky, that is when you have a radiation frost or freeze. But most of the, you know, wind machine and other technique, they're mostly used for a radiation frost, because like the wind, the fan, they basically bring down warm air close to the vines and move the cold air up, kind of do this movement of air, which helps, you know, to bring up the temperature. The only thing is, you know, wind machine are only used in what we call big vineyards, at least for us in PA. I mean, our vineyards are small, 5, you know, 10 acres. They don't typically buy a wind machine unless you have frost every, you know, spring, because it's a big investment, right? And you need a big vineyard for that to be effective.
So there
yeah.
was a
Michela,
study.
we have a question. I'm sorry, Mark. What question?
There was a study in North Carolina a couple of years ago on how cost effective a wind machine is in a vineyard, and you know, it said that for a wind machine that covers about 8 to 10 acres, if you have 3 or more frost or freeze event that you can prevent with that wind machine, which is not always the case, depending on what kind of event you have, then the investment into that wind machine might become cost effective. So
Yeah.
So you're going to have something, not just a frost event that's there, but also one which you can prevent with a wind machine, because that's not always the case.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we have a question in the Q&A. So does timing of hilling up or down affect bud break is the first question that's there.
I don't think so. I think soil type is more important. So we typically see like our soil berms can exist well into April. That doesn't really, at least in my experience, has not really affected bud break. What's more important is if you're on a more clay heavy base soil, your bud break's going to tend to be later than if you're on a well-drained sandy soil.
Okay.
That's been my experience with it.
All right.
But I also wanted to add that in Ohio, at least, almost all of our vineyards that are greater than 20 acres have wind machines, and that's their primary device that they use to prevent frost damage. It's not unusual, especially up in the northeast part of the state on the lake, that you get a combination of both advective and radiative events that occur almost simultaneously. So it'll be a super windy Tuesday, it'll get really cold overnight, and then all of a sudden, bam, that wind dies down at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and then, you know, poor growers out there trying to start up the propane wind machine at like 3 a.m. when that wind dies down, because that radiative event can drop the temperatures an extra 2-3 degrees. So where you might have been at 29 with the wind in advective conditions, you're now at 27, 26. So even if we can buffer those temps by 2 to 3 degrees, that's usually enough to push that vineyard over the edge into staving off a lot of injury. So in Ohio, yeah, I would say too, our typical vineyard size is like 3 to 5 acres, but we have a significant number of acreage in vinifera that's above 20, 50 acres plus.
Okay. We have another question. Does early use of hort oil delay bud break?
What type of oil?
Hort oil, HORT oil.
Like Jay and the Silent
Horticulture.
Neat
Maybe
oil?
it's a horticulture oil, like a vegetable oils.
I don't
I
know.
think, well, I think there are some products out there that try to kind of encapsulate the bud through an oil to kind of as protection. And I know there are some other foliar sprays as well that I know people that's pretty cheap and that we don't really have that I know of. And I'd love for y'all to discuss this about these foliar sprays that can be applied within 24 hours. What have y'all found in y'all states to see whether it works or not?
So Michela and I put some slides together about that. I know both Ahmed, who's here with us today, and Michela have done a lot of work on these products over the past 5-10 years or so. And Michela and I have also trialed KDL in various situations as well, because I believe that's what you're talking about. You're talking about 24 hours beforehand. And, you know, it's the prototypical viticulture response to say, it depends.
Just to clarify, there are two different products that you can spray, like Maria said, right? There are products like these oils, like Amigo or other vegetable oil that the purpose is to delay bud break, kind of, you know, as the double pruning, but by chemical ways, let's say. And we try, like Maria said, we tried. There is also for those like variety effect, you know, doesn't delay bud break the same way in every variety. Hybrids for us was less, for example, than vinifera. We only saw delay of 2-3 days on hybrid varieties, maybe a week, even 10 days on vinifera. But it's less predictable sometimes than double pruning, for us at least, based on our experience. But they worked in our situation. The other foliar sprays are the one you spray just before a frost, like 24 hours, like Nathan and Maria, like KDL, which is a potassium fertilizer, or copper sulfates, or product that are supposed to make the plant, let's say, more frost tolerant, you know, to decrease the freezing point inside the plant tissue, the green tissue. Do they work? Well, we try in the field, and for us didn't work. The bottom line didn't work, but also, I mean, we had a very late frost, was like May 20, and the shoots were like, you know, so I don't know if you maybe try, and it was like 25, 26, maybe Fahrenheit. I don't know if you try in another situation, maybe the temperature is 29, 30 Fahrenheit, so it's not like a very hard frost. I don't know. Definitely some growers have reported, you know, positive results with those foliar sprays. So I don't want to, you know, just say they don't work, don't try.
Well, for us, people spray their whole vineyard, right? They're out there spraying like this is cheap insurance for them. You know, if it works great. If it doesn't, well, we weren't out but a few bucks an acre. But you know, I always ask, well, did you stop with any rows? And no, we covered the whole vineyard. You know, it's like, well, how are we supposed to learn? So yeah, we'd love, just for our audience out there, if y'all end up using some of these products, give your local extension representatives a call and let us know, you know, hey, I kind of did an experiment in my vineyard, and these are some of the results. Snap some photos of clear damage, you know, try to nobody likes to leave rows blank, right? Because it's just that, oh gosh, what if it does work? And then I left 2 or 3 rows blank. And so I know it's a big risk, but if you thought to be able to do anything, we'd love to hear some feedback. But Michela, I think, I mean, and the panelists, feel free to speak up, but I don't know if there is a true definitive, yes, they work. It's so many variables in play, varieties, bud, you know, what stage of bud break or development, and then lastly, what kind of freeze, and how cold, and how quickly did it get cold? You know, and then as scientists, we just can't, you know, there's only so much that we can, you know, we try to keep as much in control, but in these situations, it's hard to assess these products for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to keep in mind sort of like what you're applying. So if it's KDL, then the goal is to try to increase the osmotic potential so that the freezing point is depressed. of the tissue. So maybe it works in less succulent tissue when they're younger versus like when we trialed it out. Yeah, it was Mother's Day weekend when we got that frost event out at the commercial vineyard that we tested this on, and those shoots were really long.
I agree 100% with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it could vary. And then also like when you're trying to use copper sulfate, those are meant to kill off ice nucleating bacteria, which is going to start as soon as you have tissue exposed. So maybe that's something that you have to spray in more of a weekly pattern, as opposed to just spraying it once and hoping it works. So really evaluating to like, what is it supposed to be doing when you're talking about that. And then also like a cardinal rule for me and our extension program is that if you're ever going to change a variable in your vineyard, always try it first. Don't go full tilt into doing something. So just do it on a subset of vines, you know, in a backpack sprayer or something like that, if you want to test it out. So yeah, absolutely agree with that.
So there's a question in chat from Kyle about, have you seen any trials or research on insulated netting material that can be used for covering the vines to prevent damage? I guess equivalent to I'm putting a blanket on it to protect it. So
No textiles.
Yeah, I can't imagine the labor associated with that. I know like in my early career, taking off bird netting is something that would make a graduate student never want to get a degree. I mean, you know, unless you, especially when your advisor says, please don't rip the netting. But anyway, go ahead and answer it. See if y'all can respond to that.
I don't know if any of you, like Michela or Justin or Mark, have had growers reach out to you about this. I've had at least 3 or 4 because it's a technique that's used in Quebec as a means to grow more sensitive varieties in like -25 °C conditions. We have at least 1, if not 2 vineyards that are wanting to implement that here in Ohio, and I am very nervous about it. 1, because it's super expensive, right? Like it's crazy expensive. But 2, we have no idea because we don't have things like high snowpack insulation, and we have a lot of weed pressure. We have a lot of fluctuating temperatures, and I'm almost afraid that we're going to end up causing more problems than we're going to solve because we're going to increase the rate of deacclimation under these types of materials. That said,
it might be helpful. It might be helpful if you have like a hard freeze in winter, but you know, as soon as you go in spring, it's gonna. I see this also very difficult to implement. You know,
what I love about this is you just said, and here in Ohio we have variable temperatures, weed pressure. And I'm going, hang on, that's Georgia. You know, so that's
we are not so different, you and I.
We're not, and that's why I love these conversations, because everybody listening to this, you know, we all shared the same challenges, and that's where I hope to address future topics, because we can relate to them. They are relatable. Keep us.
Can I bring up a point?
Sure.
So we talked about wind machines, and we haven't talked about other potential things that growers can do to mitigate frost damage in a vineyard. So off the top of my head, we have a couple, and there's a question for you all too. So we have a couple of growers who started using tractor-towed frost dragons. It's a European product which they bought and they tow through the vineyard, and it seems to work for them. It's a whole night of work where they basically heat up the vineyard with those frost dragons. So we have a few growers who do that, and I was wondering if that is something which you guys see in Texas or in Ohio or Pennsylvania or somewhere as well.
So we did some work with a grower who was using propane burners, and it was 25 or 35,000 BTU burners, 42 per acre. And it was a test. Went out to see the test, and it was 50 acres, and it was something to behold when they were all going, and it generated an immense amount of heat. And so I had temperature sensors throughout the vineyard, different parts of the vine. And there's no doubt that it did not work so long as there was not wind that did not blow the massive heat from the vineyard, because you're in a wide open area. And so any sort of heat, if there is wind, of course, you know, it's moving, it's radiating anyway, but it moves it off target. Now, comparatively, comparing the costs, you know, back the napkin kind of stuff, it was, the cost was not much different than a wind fan. And the effect was very similar under radiational frost conditions, which is where the wind fan comes into play.
Exactly.
The grower does not use it to my knowledge at this point, but he also combined it with helicopters, which are fairly commonly used here as well, because you're able to access temperatures or higher elevation. Sometimes you can find warmer air up higher, and sometimes it will be two helicopters, one on top of the other, to move the warm air that's very high down lower, and the second helicopter then pushes it to the vineyard floor.
Yeah.
And it sounds very expensive and hard to justify, but high value wine grapes with a decent crop, something like a wind fan or helicopters, they can be justified.
Yeah, definitely. You always have to
So
make,
I think those are
an
the-
estimate, the cost and the risks, right? Yeah.
Right. But those are like the two main general things that you can do, is like either move the warm air from this inversion layer down into the vineyard, or provide heat
Heat.
or insulation with water to to the grapes, basically, too.
We have a few growers that are able to use sprinkler protection, and it is sort of the ultimate frost protection, but the volume of water required is fairly incredible, and most people do not have access to that much
And
water.
depending on the dew point you have at that night, you're going to have to start your sprinkler pretty early, actually, to avoid any damage. And you have to get it running until you reach again the dew point the other day. So even if it can
And
be
if
12
the
hours or
wind
more.
kicks up, you need to apply more water. The temperature continues to drop. So you can cause more damage that way too if
Exactly.
you don't have enough the volume of water.
Right.
So you need to know what you're doing, but it
So-
works, right? Yes.
Real
It works.
quickly, and I've got 5 minutes, so I'm trying to keep us on time. As y'all can see, this is easy to keep going and talking about, and these are all great discussions. Real quickly, we got damage. It's a late spring freeze. We did everything we could do. We got some damage. Michela, Maria, what's the takeaway? What are we going to do, and what are we going to look for as we think about canopy management going through the rest of that season?
Once again, that's it depends. Like, are you talking about complete shoot loss? Or are you talking about partial shoot loss? If it's complete shoot loss and you have a very high percentage, it's almost better just to go knock them off, clean it up, and let your secondaries do their job. I know the number one thing we always say is be patient. It takes weeks for vines to come back from significant frost injury. So it's not something you can look at it and be like, oh no, everything's dead. Time to wrap it up. The other thing too is like to continue being on top of your canopy management, because you're going to end up with fewer problems down the line, as opposed to you just let everything go because you think it's a loss. So whether that means minimizing, but still having a foliar disease management program, that's really important. If you have less crop, being a little less aggressive with fertilization strategies, because you want to maintain a relatively lower vigor without it going out of control because you have no fruit on there. If it's partial damage, maybe you just let the shoot tip die back and let laterals push and take over. I mean, it really depends. And Michela, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, no, I mean, you covered the basic, like continue your spray program, because I mean, you want to keep your canopy healthy, and canopy management, especially sometimes we see because of lower crop, the vines will grow more vegetatively. So you have these very vigorous vines, right? So you need to do maybe more shoot thinning and everything to keep your canopy open up, and you want your buds be well exposed to the sun for next year growth. So and it really depends. My question, I guess, for everyone is like this knocking off the injured or dead shoots. Have you ever tried? Because we have frost almost every year at our vineyard, but I never removed the injured or dead shoots because it will take a while, right? But and I know there are very some people say helps removing them to push secondary growth. Other people said, well, it doesn't really help. I don't know if any of you had experience with that. Does it really help removing these dead shoots, or because some growers say, well, should I remove them? But it's a lot of work, right? You have labor to go there and do, or just wait for them to, fall and yeah.
I think most people just wait to let them fall and shrivel up and go. But if they're persistent and they're longer, like say 4, 5, 6 inches, then they could also harbor a lot of disease. So I think it's something that it, again, depends, like something that's going to be small and easy to flick off, or if it's something that's growing to the point where it's getting closer to lignification.
Now you have to be, and when the shoots are longer, sometimes we see, the shoot tip dies and you have a lateral that will start growing. So the shoots will keep growing. The problem is maybe the flowers or the inflorescence are dead, so that is a problem, and maybe they're not, so the shoots will keep growing, and you will have hopefully a decent crop. I mean, no full potential, but it's not like everything is lost. You may have an even fruit ripening, right? Because there will be a population of primary, secondary shoots, and the fruit will ripen at different times. So that is something also to consider. That is not like it's not like a uniform fruit ripening.
And if you have a lot of tip damage, so if it's really severe damage, then you might have to shoot thin and find, especially in a spur pruning system, and basically find your new spurs, because you're not going to get a lot of growth of those. So that's also to consider. So don't let the crew shoot thin those vines the same way they would shoot thin all the other vines, because that might hurt you at the end of the day.
Yeah, so definitely they need work. You can just keep them, you know, even if there is a minimum crop.
So we have a couple of minutes, and I just want to leave it open for some questions to the audience at this time. If you want to verbally ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Otherwise, you can send it in the chat. But just want to, while everybody, if they want to do that, I just want to say thank you for our audience today. I think we were up to 40 participants from across the entire country. This is great. As you can see through this presentation, and we hope to do this to more, it's great to have these conversations so we all can relate, share our stories sometimes in it. We can do all the science we want to, but if we can learn something from somebody else and they learned a little trick of the trade, it will help. And we want to encourage our audience, if I don't know if your industry or whom, be in touch with your local extension and universities who are doing this work. We're wanting to help y'all solve your problems. We're wanting to help grow our industry. We're your biggest fans. We work hard every day at trying to understand the science behind why things happen. I just want to thank our panelists today, Justin, Maria, Michela, Renee, and Mark. Thank you all for joining us and sharing. There's some great work being done out there, and it's a late frost is nothing easy to manage, but I loved having this discussion of some of the tools that are in our toolbox, as well as how to assess that following. If anybody listening in wants to follow up with more questions, I can get it to our panel. I tell you what, I'll type my email address into the chat there. And feel free to forward me future questions and we'll try to get those answered.
And Nathan, when is the next hang time?
So our next one is going to be March 22nd. And we're going to have, for me, somebody I know well, Dr. Phil Brannon from UGA, who's our pathologist. So we all have diseases, but Dr. Brannon has been on the cutting edge for the South, at least, and that's not to neglect the North, folks, but about some resistance buildup. And some of you may be equivalent to spraying water if you have not done some resistance testing. So Dr. Brandon's going to talk about that and more. Again, that's March 22nd. So we hope you join us for that.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. And thanks for putting this together. This is awesome. This is really
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's nice to share, you know, with
I think we could all
everyone.
talk for another hour, but for the sake of everybody's time, and I know it's supposed to be lunch and learn, but I'm not going to eat in front of everybody, so I'm going to go grab some food.
Yeah.
So
So good
we'll-
luck, everyone. No spring frost
Yeah, fingers
damage
crossed.
for
Yeah.
everyone.